The scratch was small, barely noticeable, but to the girl standing there, it felt like the end of the world. She stared at the thin white mark on the black car, hands shaking, heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. She looked around the empty parking lot. No cameras, no people, no help. Running crossed her mind. She didn't. Instead, she pulled a pen from her bag, tore a corner off her notebook, and wrote slowly, carefully, like every word mattered. "I'm so sorry. Please, call me." She left her phone number underneath, folded the paper twice, and tucked it gently under the windshield wiper. Then she stood there for a moment, whispering an apology no one could hear. She didn't know that Carr belonged to the most feared Mafia boss in the city. She didn't know the men watching from across the street were his. She didn't know how close she was to danger. All she knew was that she couldn't walk away from a mistake. Minutes later, a man in a dark coat approached the car. He stopped when he saw the note, picked it up, read it once, then again. And for the first time in years, the man who ruled the city without mercy smiled. "Stay with me until the end, because that single phone number will change both of their lives forever." Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. This is the story of Emma Chen, a 23-year-old art student who worked 3 part-time jobs just to afford her cramped studio apartment near the university. She was the kind of person who apologized when other people bumped into her, who always carried exact change to avoid making cashiers wait, who would rather starve than ask for help. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Emma rushed across campus with her worn messenger bag bouncing against her hip, clutching a lukewarm coffee from the campus vending machine because she couldn't afford the cafe prices. Her art history textbook was due back at the library, and the fine was already eating into her grocery budget for the week. The university parking lot was nearly empty at 9 in the morning. Most students were either in class or still sleeping off the previous night. Emma's beat-up Honda Civic coughed and wheezed as she pulled into what she thought was an empty space. The sound of metal scraping against metal made her stomach drop. She threw the car into park and jumped out, her worst fears confirmed. A sleek black luxury sedan sat in the space next to hers, and now it wore a thin scratch along its pristine paint. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The car was immaculate, the kind of vehicle that cost more than most people made in several years. The kind of car that belonged to someone who definitely wouldn't understand her financial situation. She circled the vehicle slowly, examining the damage. It wasn't deep, but it was visible. Undeniable. Her fault. The parking lot stretched empty around her. Security cameras pointed toward the main walkways, but this corner remained in their blind spot. No witnesses wandered nearby. The morning mist would wash away any evidence within hours. Emma could leave. She could pretend it never happened. Drive away and hope the owner would assume it occurred somewhere else, by someone else. The logical part of her brain screamed that she couldn't afford whatever this would cost. She had $17 in her checking account and 2 maxed-out credit cards. But Emma had been raised by her grandmother, a woman who cleaned office buildings for 40 years and never took so much as a paperclip that wasn't hers. Her grandmother always said that character wasn't about what you did when people were watching. Character was about what you did when nobody would ever know. With trembling fingers, Emma reached into her bag for a pen. She tore a corner from her spiral notebook, the same one she used for lecture notes and sketches. Her handwriting shook as she wrote, each letter carefully formed despite her racing heart. "I'm so sorry. Please, call me." She added her phone number below the apology, then stared at the note for a long moment. This simple piece of paper represented everything she feared: confrontation, debt, disappointing someone. But it also represented everything her grandmother had taught her about doing the right thing, even when it hurt. Emma folded the note twice, creating sharp creases with her fingernails. She approached the luxury sedan like it might bite her, then carefully tucked the paper under the windshield wiper. The wind immediately tried to steal it away, but the wiper held it secure. She stood there for another minute, whispering another apology to the empty air. Then she gathered her courage, climbed back into her Honda, and drove to class with her hands still shaking on the steering wheel. What Emma didn't know was that two men in dark suits had been watching from across the street. Takni stood beside their own black SUV, speaking quietly into earpieces, reporting every detail of what they'd witnessed. What Emma didn't know was that the car she'd scratched belonged to Vincent Romano, a man whose name was whispered in the city's shadows, a man who controlled half the underground businesses from the docks to downtown, a man who had built his empire on the principle that every slight, no matter how small, demanded a response. What Emma didn't know was that Vincent Romano hadn't reached his position by showing mercy to those who damaged his property. People had disappeared for less than a scratch on his car. 20 minutes after Emma drove away, Vincent emerged from the university administration building, where he'd been making a very persuasive donation to ensure certain records remained private. He was 42 years old, with silver threading through his dark hair and eyes that missed nothing. His tailored suit probably cost more than Emma's entire wardrobe. Vincent approached his car with the confident stride of a man who owned everything he touched. He noticed the note immediately, fluttering against his windshield like a white flag of surrender. He pulled the paper free and unfolded it carefully, read the words once, then again. His expression remained neutral, but something shifted behind his eyes. For 15 years, Vincent had dealt with people who lied to his face, politicians who promised favors they'd never deliver, business partners who skimmed profits they thought he wouldn't notice, enemies who smiled while plotting his downfall. Everyone wanted something from him. Everyone had an angle. Everyone calculated their words to manipulate his response. But this note was different, raw, honest, vulnerable in a way that nobody dared to be around him anymore. Vincent stood in the empty parking lot, holding a piece of notebook paper that represented something he'd almost forgotten existed: genuine remorse, authentic accountability, someone choosing honesty when lies would have been easier and safer. He carefully folded the note and slipped it into his jacket pocket, right over his heart. Then he examined the scratch on his car, running his finger along the thin line. Barely visible, easily repaired. But somehow, for reasons he couldn't quite name, he found himself hoping the person who wrote this note wouldn't be too frightened when he called. Because Vincent Romano was definitely going to call. He had questions about the kind of person who would leave such a note. Questions about what else might be different about someone brave enough to confess a mistake to a stranger. Questions that would lead him down a path he never could have imagined. That evening, Emma sat in her studio apartment, staring at her phone like it was a loaded weapon. Every ring made her jump. Every notification sent her heart racing. She'd spent the entire day in classes unable to focus, her mind replaying the morning's events over and over. Her roommate Sarah noticed her distress immediately. "Emma, you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened?" So Emma told her everything. The scratch, the expensive car, the note she'd left behind. Sarah's eyes grew wider with each detail. "Are you insane?" Sarah exclaimed. "You could have just walked away. Nobody would have known." "That's exactly why I couldn't walk away," Emma replied quietly. "Because nobody would have known. But what if they demand money you don't have? What if they're angry? What if they sue you?" Sarah's questions echoed every fear that had been eating at Emma all day. "I don't know," Emma whispered. "I just know I did the right thing." Meanwhile, across the city, Vincent Romano sat in his private study, the note spread flat on his mahogany desk. The room was lined with first-edition books he'd never read, and artwork he'd acquired through methods that would horrify most people. But tonight, his attention was completely captured by a piece of torn notebook paper. Wabu, Lieutenant Marcus, stood nearby, clearly confused by his boss's fascination with what seemed like a minor incident. "Sir, do you want me to handle this? We could send someone to collect payment for the damage." Vincent held up a hand for silence. Not yet. Tell me about her. Marcus consulted his tablet. Emma Chen, 23 years old, art student at the university. Lives alone in a studio apartment downtown. Works 3 part-time jobs. No criminal record, no family connections to any of our operations. Clean as a whistle. Vincent nodded slowly. And she just left this note voluntarily? No witnesses forcing her hand? No security cameras she was worried about? None, sir. She could have walked away completely free. She chose to leave her contact information. Vincent leaned back in his leather chair, studying the handwriting again. The letters were slightly shaky but carefully formed. Whoever wrote this had taken time to make it legible, despite obvious nervousness. In his world, people only told the truth when they were terrified of the consequences of lying. But this girl had told the truth when lying would have been completely safe. That kind of honesty was rarer than diamonds in his experience. Do we have her phone number traced? Marcus nodded. Confirmed. It matches her student records and employment files. The number is legitimate. Vincent picked up his personal phone, the one he used for family matters and situations requiring discretion. He stared at Emma's number for several minutes, considering his options. He could have Marcus handle this quietly. Send someone to collect a few $100s for the repair and close the matter. He could ignore it entirely. Write off the minimal damage as a cost of doing business. Or he could do something he hadn't done in years. Something that went against every instinct that had kept him alive in a dangerous world. He could make the call himself. Vincent dialed the number slowly, each digit deliberate. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, a nervous voice answered. Hello? Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. She'd been expecting this call all day, but somehow she still wasn't prepared for it. Is this Emma Chen? Vincent's voice was calm, controlled, giving nothing away about his identity or intentions. Yes, that's me. Did I damage your car? I'm so sorry. I left a note with my information. I'll pay for whatever it costs to fix it. The words tumbled out of her in a rush, fear and guilt evident in every syllable. Vincent found himself smiling again, though he couldn't explain why. You did damage my car. A scratch on the driver's side door. Emma's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. Oh no, I'm so sorry. How much will it cost? I don't have much money right now, but I can work out a payment plan. I promise I'll pay every penny. Most people in Emma's situation would have started with excuses or justifications. They would have minimized the damage or questioned whether it was really their fault. But Emma led with accountability and a promise to make things right, even though she was clearly terrified of the financial implications. The repair will cost approximately $800, Vincent said, watching her reaction. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that he wondered if she'd fainted. $800. Emma closed her eyes, calculating quickly. That was more than her rent. More than she made in a month at any of her part-time jobs. It might as well have been 8,000 or 8 million. But she'd caused the damage, and she had to face the consequences. I understand, she said finally, her voice steady despite everything. I'll find a way to pay it. It might take some time, but I will pay it. Can we meet somewhere to discuss a payment schedule? Vincent was quiet for a moment, genuinely surprised by her response. In his experience, people either tried to negotiate down the amount or looked for ways to avoid paying entirely. But Emma had accepted full responsibility without question and was already trying to figure out how to fulfill her obligation. There's a coffee shop called Bella's on 5th Street, he said. Do you know it? Emma nodded, though he couldn't see her. Yes, I pass it on my way to work. Can you meet me there tomorrow at 7 in the evening? Emma hesitated. She had a shift at the campus bookstore until 6:30, but she could make it work. Yes, I can be there. How will I recognize you? I'll be the man reading a newspaper at the corner table. And Emma? Yes, sir. Thank you for leaving the note. Not many people would have done that. The line went quiet for a moment before Emma responded softly. It was the right thing to do. After hanging up, Vincent sat in his study for a long time, staring at the note. Marcus watched him carefully, recognizing the contemplative mood that usually preceded important decisions. "Sir, is everything all right?" "More than all right, Marcus." Vincent folded the note carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. "Cancel my meetings tomorrow evening. I have a coffee appointment to keep." Marcus raised an eyebrow but said nothing. In all his years working for Vincent Romano, he'd never known his boss to personally handle such a minor incident. But he'd learned long ago not to question Vincent's methods, even when they seemed unusual. Emma spent the rest of the evening calculating and recalculating her finances, trying to figure out how she could possibly come up with $800. She could pick up extra shifts, maybe sell some of her art supplies, ask her boss at the campus library if there were any additional hours available. It would mean eating ramen noodles for months and giving up any small luxuries. But she'd find a way. She had to. Her grandmother had always said that your word was the only thing you truly owned, and Emma wasn't about to break hers over a car scratch. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Emma had no idea that the man she'd be meeting tomorrow controlled more money in a single day than she'd see in her entire lifetime. She had no idea that he was known throughout the city as someone you crossed at your own peril. All she knew was that she'd damaged someone's property, and tomorrow she'd begin making it right. Whatever the cost, whatever it took, she'd honor her commitment, because that's who Emma Chen was, and that's exactly what would save her life. Her life. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Emma's mood perfectly. She'd barely slept, tossing and turning as scenarios played through her mind. What if this person was violent? What if they demanded more money than agreed? What if they brought lawyers? But beneath the fear lay something stronger. Her grandmother's voice, steady and sure, reminding her that running from your mistakes only made them grow larger in the shadows. Emma dressed carefully for work, choosing her most professional outfit. A simple black sweater and jeans that had seen better days, but were clean and pressed. She braided her dark hair back neatly and applied just enough makeup to hide the dark circles under her eyes. Her first job was at the campus coffee cart, where she spent 4 hours making lattes for students who barely acknowledged her existence. The familiar routine of grinding beans and steaming milk usually calmed her nerves, but today every task felt mechanical, distant. During her lunch break, she walked past Bella's coffee shop on 5th Street. The windows were fogged with condensation, warm light spilling onto the wet sidewalk. She pressed her face against the glass, trying to spot the corner table where she'd meet her fate in just a few hours. The afternoon dragged endlessly. At the campus bookstore, she shelved returns and helped students find textbooks they couldn't afford to buy new. Every time her phone buzzed with a text or notification, her heart hammered against her ribs. But no calls came. No last-minute changes or demands. By 6:15, Emma was walking through the light rain toward Bella's, her stomach twisted in knots. She'd counted her cash 3 times. $47.36. Not even close to $800, but it was a start. A gesture of good faith. She pushed through the coffee shop door, bell chiming softly above her head. The warmth hit her immediately, along with the rich aroma of roasted beans and fresh pastries. Students hunched over laptops filled most tables, but the corner spot sat empty except for a man reading a newspaper. Emma's breath caught. Even seated, she could tell he was tall and broad-shouldered. His dark hair was perfectly styled, silver threading through at the temples. His suit looked expensive, the kind that was tailored specifically for the wearer. When he glanced up from his paper, his eyes were the darkest brown she'd ever seen, almost black in the coffee shop's dim lighting. This wasn't what she'd expected. She'd imagined someone older, maybe a businessman or professor, someone safe and predictable. But this man radiated a quiet intensity that made the air around him feel charged with electricity. Vincent watched the girl approach his table, noting every detail. She was smaller than he'd imagined, maybe 5 feet 4 inches, with delicate features and enormous dark eyes that reminded him of a deer caught in headlights. Her clothes were clean, but clearly inexpensive. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched a small purse against her chest. Everything about her screamed vulnerability, innocence, the kind of person his world usually destroyed without a second thought. Yet here she was, walking directly toward the most dangerous man in the city, because she'd promised to make things right. "Are you Emma Chen?" His voice was softer than it had been on the phone, but it still carried an undertone of authority that made people listen carefully. "Yes, sir." Emma's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. She gestured toward the empty chair across from him. "May I sit?" Vincent nodded, folding his newspaper and setting it aside. Emma perched on the edge of the chair like she might need to run at any moment. She placed her purse carefully on the small table between them. "Would you like something to drink?" Vincent asked, surprising himself with the offer. "Coffee? Tea?" Emma shook her head quickly. "No, thank you. I don't want to take up too much of your time." She opened her purse and pulled out a small envelope. "I brought what I could for now. $47. I know it's not much, but I thought you should see that I'm serious about paying you back." Vincent stared at the envelope she'd placed on the table. $47. He spent more than that on lunch most days. His watch cost more than she'd probably earn in 6 months. But she'd brought every penny she could scrape together, offered it without hesitation or excuse. "Keep your money for now," he said quietly. Emma's eyes widened in confusion and worry. "But I owe you $800. The damage was my fault, and I need to pay for it. I can work out a payment plan if you'd prefer. Maybe $50 a month until it's paid off?" Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying her face. No calculation lived in her expression. No attempt to manipulate or charm her way out of the debt. Just honest determination to fulfill an obligation that would clearly cause her significant hardship. "Tell me about yourself, Emma. What do you study?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected demands for payment schedules or legal threats, not small talk. "Art history with a focus on classical restoration. I want to work in museums someday, helping preserve paintings and sculptures for future generations." "That's admirable work, important work." Vincent found himself genuinely interested in her answer. "What draws you to restoration, specifically?" Emma's nervous energy settled slightly as she talked about something she loved. "I think there's something beautiful about taking something damaged or neglected and bringing it back to its original glory. Every piece has a story, and restoration helps those stories continue being told." Vincent absorbed her words carefully. Taking something damaged and bringing it back to its original glory. The irony wasn't lost on him. His entire empire was built on breaking things that couldn't be repaired. "You work 3 jobs while going to school full-time." It wasn't a question. Vincent had read Marcus's report thoroughly. Emma nodded, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "The campus coffee cart in the mornings, the bookstore most afternoons, and I clean offices on weekends. It's a lot. But education is expensive and I don't have family who can help with tuition." "No family at all?" Again, Vincent knew the answer, but he wanted to hear it from her. "My grandmother raised me. After my parents died in a car accident when I was 7, she passed away 3 years ago, right before I started college. She left me a small inheritance that covered my first year, but after that, I've been on my own." The matter-of-fact way she delivered this information struck Vincent harder than he'd expected. No self-pity, no attempt to gain sympathy, just the simple truth of a young woman who'd faced loss and hardship, but kept moving forward anyway. "I'm sorry for your loss. She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." Emma's face lit up with the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "She was incredible. She taught me that your character isn't measured by what you have, but by what you do with what you're given. She always said that doing the right thing might not always be easy, but it's always simple." Vincent felt something twist in his chest. His own grandmother had said similar things, back when he was young enough to believe them, before the world had taught him that. Good people finished last. That kindness was a luxury only the powerful could afford. "Is that why you left the note?" Because it was the right thing to do? Yes, sir. I couldn't live with myself knowing I'd damaged your property and just walked away. Even if nobody ever found out, I would have known, and my grandmother would have been disappointed in me. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. In his line of work, people were motivated by fear, greed, or desperation. But Emma was motivated by the memory of an elderly woman who'd been dead for 3 years and the desire to live up to standards that existed only in her own conscience. The repair estimate I gave you was inflated, he said finally. Emma's forehead creased in confusion. I'm sorry. What do you mean? The actual cost to fix the scratch is maybe $200. I told you $800 to see how you'd react. Emma's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. She looked like she was trying to process this information and failing completely. You were testing me? Her voice was barely audible. Yes. Vincent felt an unfamiliar stab of guilt at the hurt that flashed across her features. I wanted to see if you were genuinely remorseful or just trying to minimize your responsibility. And what did you decide? Vincent reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out her note, now carefully preserved in a clear, protective sleeve. He placed it on the table between them. I decided that you're either the most honest person I've met in 15 years, or you're playing a game so sophisticated that I can't detect it. Emma stared at the note, seeing her own handwriting preserved like some precious artifact. I don't play games. I don't know how. And I definitely don't understand why you'd want to test a stranger who scratched your car. Because strangers who leave honest notes when they could walk away are extremely rare in my experience. Because people who offer to pay debts they can't afford are even rarer. Because someone who does the right thing when it costs them everything is almost extinct. Emma met his eyes directly for the first time since sitting down. You talk like kindness is some kind of miracle, but it's not. It's just basic human decency. It's how people are supposed to treat each other. Vincent felt something crack inside his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced when reading her note for the first time. This girl lived in a world where kindness was normal, expected, the default setting for human interaction. His world was so far removed from that reality that her perspective felt like looking at an alien landscape. Where I come from, kindness is often seen as weakness. People who show mercy get taken advantage of. People who trust get betrayed. That sounds like a horrible way to live, Emma said softly. Always looking over your shoulder, never believing that someone might just be genuinely good. It's kept me alive, Vincent replied, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. But has it kept you happy? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Vincent couldn't remember the last time someone had asked him about happiness. In his world, happiness was a luxury that got you killed. Survival was all that mattered. But looking at Emma, seeing the genuine concern in her dark eyes, he realized that survival wasn't the same thing as living. He'd been so focused on protecting himself from the world's cruelty that he'd forgotten what it felt like to experience its beauty. I should pay you the $200 for the actual damage, Emma said, breaking the silence. It's still my responsibility. Vincent shook his head. The scratch is barely visible. Consider it a lesson learned about parking more carefully. But I damaged your property. That has consequences. Yes, it does. Vincent leaned forward slightly. The consequence is that you've reminded me of something I thought I'd lost forever. Something more valuable than any car repair. Emma tilted her head slightly, clearly confused but listening intently. You've reminded me that there are still people in this world who choose honesty over convenience. People who keep their word, even when it costs them everything. People who do the right thing simply because it's right. Vincent stood slowly, pulling on his coat. Emma scrambled to her feet as well, still clutching her purse with the $47 she'd brought. Keep your money, Emma Chen. Use it for something that makes you happy. Buy art supplies or textbooks or whatever brings you joy. I don't understand. Why would you do this for someone you don't even know? Vincent paused at her question, considering his answer carefully. The truth was complicated, dangerous, impossible to explain without revealing things that would terrify her. Because sometimes the universe sends you exactly what you need, exactly when you need it, even if you don't recognize it at first. He reached into his other jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, plain white with only a phone number printed in simple black text. If you ever need anything, anything at all, call this number. Someone will always answer, and they'll know to help you. Emma took the card with trembling fingers, staring at the number like it might reveal its secrets if she looked hard enough. I don't understand any of this. Why would you want to help me? What do you get out of it? Vincent smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. I get to remember what it feels like to be surprised by human goodness. I get to remember why hope isn't just for fools. He turned to leave, then paused at the coffee shop door. Emma? She looked up from the business card. Thank you for scratching my car. It was exactly what I needed. And then he was gone, disappearing into the evening rain like he'd never been there at all. Emma stood alone in the warm coffee shop, holding a business card with no name and a story she couldn't quite believe had really happened. She didn't know that Vincent Romano had just made the most dangerous decision of his life. She didn't know that showing interest in her had painted a target on both their backs. She didn't know that his enemies would see her as either a weakness to exploit or a threat to eliminate. All Emma knew was that a stranger had shown her unexpected kindness when he could have demanded payment she couldn't afford. A stranger had seen something valuable in her simple act of honesty. A stranger had given her a lifeline she hadn't known she needed. What she didn't know was that this stranger's world was about to collide with hers in ways that would change everything, and that the choice to leave that note would soon become the choice between life and death. Because in Vincent Romano's world, nothing stayed innocent for long, and that's the extraordinary power of a single honest choice. Emma Chen had no idea that her simple note would crack open the heart of the city's most dangerous man. She had no idea that choosing truth over convenience would save her from a world of consequences she couldn't even imagine. But that's the thing about genuine kindness. It ripples outward in ways we never expect. It finds the cracks in the hardest hearts and plants seeds of hope in the darkest places. Vincent Romano thought he'd buried his humanity so deep that nothing could reach it. But one honest note from a terrified art student proved him completely wrong. Sometimes the smallest acts of integrity create the biggest transformations. Sometimes doing the right thing when nobody's watching is exactly what someone else needs to remember who they used to be. Sometimes a scratch on a car becomes the beginning of something beautiful and dangerous and completely unexpected. Emma's story reminds us that our choices matter, even when we think nobody will notice, especially when we think nobody will notice. Because somewhere out there, someone is watching. Someone needs to see that good people still exist. Someone is waiting for proof that kindness isn't just weakness wearing a disguise. What choice will you make when nobody's watching? What note will you leave when you could just walk away? Because you never know whose life you might save with a simple act of honesty. Until next time, remember that sometimes the smallest choices create the biggest miracles.